Welcome to a new episode of These Go to 11. Let's turn it up. Hey everybody, welcome back to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. This not only helps us to get our content out there, but also helps us to find out what you, our faithful listeners, think. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me as always, Greg Dutcher. Greg, what is going on, my friend?
Everything, my man. We are in the thick of it now. We've got summer fully upon us.
Second week of June.
I know, man. Feeling good. You know, I'm going to be finishing up my residency.
Yep.
My final residency with Wilkes.
Yep.
I'm only required to be there a few days this time because the graduating, I don't know what we are, seniors or whatever we are in a grad program are. Kind of bittersweet. Like we all show up, we'll all see our buddies.
Yep.
But we're only there really the last 3 days instead of the full 8.
Right.
Because we've done everything this previous semester and all the work's in and all the stuff is done. And so you kind of show up, you meet with the director, David Hicks, who's a wonderful guy. Kind of talks to you about the writing life and things you should be thinking and doing, staying in community. And then, I'll say goodbye to that chapter. And dude, it's bittersweet. The bitter is, I've made great friends there. The sweet is to open up a little more time.
Right.
Is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
First time in 2.5 years, I won't be up against some kind of scholastic deadline like that. And it feels good.
Any plans for the summer? Vacations, getaways, things like that you guys have worked out?
Kind of, sort of, yes, maybe, kind of. We've got the kids going in so many different directions.
Yeah.
Isaac getting ready for college, and him, dude, he has to report because of football at his school. I think by I want to say August 10th.
Probably, yeah.
It's because they've got their training camp basically and all that. Ben is going to start law school around the same time. Law school works a little different than the undergrad stuff you're used to, where it's late August or right after Labor Day. It's around the same time.
Okay.
Fairly early August. Sam is always traveling and going. So we don't have a full-orbed trip yet, but we have some possibilities. What about you?
Yeah, we so the beginning of July, we'll start our we'll take about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Every year we do a cousins camp.
I love that, dude.
Our nieces and nephews. We don't know what that's going to look like this year. There's some plans that are still being worked on, last minute stuff. So we don't know what that'll look like, but it'll take some form of cousins camp that we'll do. And then
Lisa and I love your cousins camp.
Oh, it's
those kids
so
are going to remember that their whole life. To get together with their aunt and uncle. I love you guys do the T-shirts, the contest, the fun foods, the movie nights, and all. Dude, I want to be a cousins camp.
Well, it's funny because when we first started doing it, Joy's brother was like, "Wait, forget the kids. Let's the siblings get together and do something like this." I was
going to say, man, the parents. I know the idea. You're serving those parents. They get time away from the kids, and that has its place too. But sometimes, like, man, I might be having more fun at cousins camp. Of course, dude, I don't think you get my size T-shirt, but that's a whole other thing. And I assume, dude, you'll be heading up to God's country.
Oh, yes. Yep. So the plan is to kind of at the end of Cousins Camp, we will take my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's kids back to them, Joy's brother and sister-in-law. We'll take the kids back to them, probably do 4th of July with them, and then we'll kind of, because they're in upper state New York, Syracuse, we'll cut across to New England and then spend about a week in New England. So, looking forward to it.
Getting that taste last summer was so good, and getting up there this summer was not likely in the cards.
Yeah.
But we will get back there for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I got to try some of those diners you told me about, dude.
Man.
Got to get some of that sausage, gravy, and biscuits.
Oh, so good.
And dude, if the Lord gives me breath, I will do it. I will do it. But, dude, I believe last week for the few people that say, "Come on, guys, stop the banter and get to it."
That's all right.
We know who you are. We love you. No. But you ended with a question.
I did. Ended with a little bit of a cliffhanger. If you remember the series Alias, they would always stop you in the middle of an episode and then kind of pick back up the next week. And so I did a little bit of that, not right in the middle of an episode, but at the end. And the question was, just as a refresher for everyone, for the person who's avoided the Old Testament for years, whatever the reason might be, what's one book or story you'd encourage them to read first, and why?
I'd probably say The Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, wait, no, you're asking me a serious question? No, I might not recommend starting there. Obviously, it's a dark section. I've thought about that, dude, since you asked the question, and I'm kind of torn between two.
Okay. See if any of ours line up with that, so.
Well, I'll give you the one I think that slightly edges it out. And as soon as I say it, I'm going to say, I should have picked the other. I'm thinking of shorter books in the Old Testament that have a self-contained story and are fairly easy to follow. And I think I'm going to go with Jonah.
Okay.
And reason I love the story of Jonah is there's the excitement factor. You've got the runaway prophet. You've got the large fish, whale, whatever it may be.
Right.
Is obviously a kid's favorite and a kind of a startling story. But most of all, you get this wonderful glimpse. In other words, when you really get through the end of Jonah, you have a glimpse into the heart of God that has not changed between the two testaments.
Yeah.
And you've actually got Jonah angry. It's a very interesting way to capture God's kindness and patience and long-suffering and goodness, because Jonah finally just is seething and basically shakes his fist to God and says, I knew you were like this.
Right.
I knew you were going to relent and not judge them. It's a really interesting passage. And now you find out the big secret of Jonah was he didn't run away because he was scared.
Right.
That's what I think you're supposed to think.
Yeah.
But the story is like a Hollywood story. There's a twist.
Yeah.
The twist is, you weren't scared.
Yeah.
You didn't want the Ninevites, the Gentile enemy of God's nation Israel. You didn't want them to repent and get God's mercy.
Yeah.
And then for Jonah to say, I knew you were like this, which should make him fall on his knees, lift his hands in worship. But he likes it when it's for him and his people.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want God's grace spilling over to his enemies.
Yeah.
So that would be my choice.
You said you had two, though.
Yeah.
So what was the other one?
The other one was Ruth.
Okay.
I've preached Ruth twice. Dude, I don't know what it is. I love that story.
Yeah.
I just think it's got so much intrigue to it.
Yep.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful love story. It's a beautiful story of God's provision for Ruth.
Yep.
I love the whole deal with her and her mother-in-law, Naomi. All these, it breaks your heart. They're widows, have all lost their husbands. And, here's Naomi being a good mother-in-law. Honey, just go back. Go back. Find your family.
There is no life with me.
There's no life.
hope.
Don't come with me. I'm an old lady. I'm going back to Israel during a famine.
Yeah.
I might be in big trouble, but don't you? And just the way Naomi, obviously, I believe, has paid attention to her mother-in-law, her faith. Wherever you go, I will go. Mm-hmm. And your God shall be my God, and your people are going to be my people. Yeah. And that's how it starts. And the question is, will that happen? Yeah. And it happens because of God's providence. Yep. Through the kindness of a man named Boaz. And in that society, patriarchal society, you're kind of like, is it going to happen? Right. Is this Moabitess going to be part of it? So again, I guess like Jonah, you kind of have God's heart for the outsider. Yeah. Working through Israel. I mean, it's just a beautiful, all we talked about last week, the story, the unfolding story of God. Ruth is kind of that in miniature. Yeah. God is using Israel to bless the families of the earth. And while that doesn't happen, sadly, as it should have, you do have a story where it actually does in a small microcosm. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. What about you? Good.
So, like you, I have two. Yeah. The first one I would say would be Hosea.
Oh, yeah.
The picture that God is revealing of himself, right? Hosea marries the wayward woman,
Gomer,
right?
Yeah.
And God's command to him is, no matter what she does to you, you're to take her back. You're to take her back,
Stay
right?
with her.
And this is God's picture of us, that we're going to continuously reject him, and God is going to continuously take us back.
Yes.
He's going to continuously take us back. And so to me, that picture of who he is and what he does for his people, I think is just, when you talk about the potential differences, right, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, where is the God of love and the God of mercy and the God of grace? Well, he's right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's just so amazing. The other one, which is a little bit more obscure, but I just can't get away from it because I love when God brags on himself.
Yeah.
Because anyone else who brags on themselves, they're being arrogant. When God does it, it's true.
Just being truthful. Of course.
And so Job.
Yep. Oh, yeah, dude.
Him showing himself who he is, that he's Lord over all, right? Even the reasons why he does things, he's in control of those things.
Yeah.
And there are things that we get privy to, and there are things that we don't. But he's in control over all of it. Yeah. And him coming in and answering Job out of the storm, right? Just that awe and power just shows how much far above us he is, and why we owe him our worship, why we owe him our allegiance. I love those pieces in Scripture. And so, again, more abstract, probably something you'd have to walk someone through a little bit more. But
no, but I get it.
I
get it, dude. I love those choices. Yeah. Hosea, wow. I mean, what a picture. And what you said, you were invoking one of my favorite phrases from my beloved Roscoe Adams.
Yep.
Love it when God starts bragging on himself. And I know that's a challenge for people. And it's because when we project it on any of us, we're, oh my goodness, how arrogant.
Yeah.
But I love what Piper says about that. He says, the most loving thing God could do for his creatures is to show them where they are meant to find their deepest joy, truest satisfaction, eternal fulfillment. And it's in God himself. So if God were kind of, you know what I mean, like falsely humble and giving the glory to, I don't know what, us or an angel or a planet.
Right.
Dude, it would be the most unloving thing.
Yeah.
Because he'd be pointing us away from himself. So, and I remember that insight. I said, what a brilliant insight for God to, quote unquote, brag on himself, to just tell the truth about his nature, his glory over all the other phony gods and goddesses and the idols that we erect. Is so loving, because it points us, and then he invites us basically to test those truth claims, and we find them to be true.
Yep.
Oh, there is none like him. Great stories, dude. Good choice. Good way to get us in.
So picking up, we are our series Old Testament Phobia.
Yeah.
So this was just kind of a little bit of a bridge and continuation. And today, last week we talked about the roadmap through the Old Testament, right? And so this is just kind of ending that discussion, moving into our second episode, which really, like, if I had to put a title on this, right? Why is the Old Testament so weird? Right? I mean, really, that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's exactly what we're saying. And why be afraid to say it?
Yeah.
Because I think most people read it like, what do I do? Right? And of course.
So episode 2, why is the Old Testament so weird? And so we're going to talk a lot about those things that really make it difficult to understand because maybe they're cultural things.
Yeah.
Make it difficult to understand because, I mean, let's face it, this is thousands of years removed So trying to understand where people and culture were at this time is very difficult. I mean, talking about, if we were to look at technology, right, I could instantly pull up on my phone and know what disasters hit China, right? What disasters hit Japan, right? I could immediately find those things out, where back then you only knew what disasters were hitting your neighbor.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And so for us to kind of comprehend how small the world was for them at that time, arguably, for us, the world is a lot smaller because of all the technology and things like that. But the reality is their world consisted of their neighbors, their community, right? And you might extend, a few miles out into the greater area.
But you're right, not much.
Yeah.
Not much. There were no telephonic communication, no satellite, heck, no Pony Express.
Right.
No smoke signals, right? You've just got a very communal society on top of each other.
Yeah.
Learning to live together. I think that's a very good point, foundational point to start. Why it feels so weird, because we live in a very different world.
Yeah. And so the first place that I want to start, and we mentioned this last week, right? What if somebody grabbed their Bible off the shelf, they opened up to
Leviticus or Numbers,
right? So let's talk about that, right? Why do you think we struggle as modern readers reading those selections of Leviticus or Numbers, or you mentioned First and Second Chronicles, right?
Yep.
Why do you think we struggle with some of those things?
Dude, I think, to, again, belabor the point, we are, as you said, modern readers. And I think modern readers, by definition, bring modern expectations.
Yeah.
And I don't want this to sound, I'm not trying to denounce, I'm trying to be as honest as I know. I think most people would agree. I think we bring, as 21st century modern Americans, most of us, or North American, Western, individualistic, therapeutic expectations. I think we're used to fast-paced narratives.
Yeah.
And kind of quick moral application.
Yep.
Not ancient Near Eastern covenant language.
Yeah.
Which I think by definition is slow. I think by definition is much more about contemplation. This is who I am. This is who you are. And I think, so it's not just that the world is different. It is. But the engagement of God with his people in that time, in that society, for what he was doing at that point, is different. Maybe different than we expect it would have been.
Yeah.
But I do think when we slow down and remember that this was a real culture with a real God forming his real people, it starts to make more sense.
Well, and if we think about some of these things in the context of a business perspective, right? Yeah. If you hire a new employee, hopefully you don't dump everything on them at once, right? You take your time with them, right? You start at the basics. Hey, let me introduce you to the company, our vision, our mission. Right? We go from there, and then let's start with what you're going to be doing now and what that entails, right? And you work and you build someone from the expectation that okay, maybe they have knowledge about the thing they're going to do, but they don't have knowledge about my identity as an employer and who I am necessarily. I need to get them acclimated to those things so that they begin to take on that identity in the process, right? This is where God starts with his people.
Dude, again, Israel in its infancy.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. And think of our own infancy. I mean, I know it's weird when we're thinking of a national entity, but it doesn't change the fact they're new.
Right.
They don't have much of a history at all. I mean, there isn't much of a history.
Right.
You could trace it back ultimately to a family.
Yep.
Abraham, who's, again, I think I mentioned last week and never finished it. His name is first Avram, which means exalted father. It is changed to Avraham, Abraham, father of many.
Yep.
But so they've got a patriarchal family. Look at us, dude. We're 250 years into the story of the United States. And then you could add another 100 years before, basically going back to, Jamestown and the colonies, a little more than, 100. What was that? 1630s, somewhere about there. And then if you want to go back, you go back to Europe and you can go back to the old world. And there's a lot of history, a lot of culture, a lot of rituals, traditions that have been shaped. Israel, we're finding them in their infancy. So I think that's a good point, and I expect it to go slow. Yeah. Let's take your analogy of orientation. Most good orientations remind me of every board game I've ever played that I don't know about. Right. Like where your friends have a party and they introduce a game and they're trying to explain the rules. If you just dump all the rules, I don't really get it. Right. So I'm one who always says, I'll kind of figure it out when we play. Sure. A good orientation typically would say, listen, I'm going to call if this is going to make a lot more sense to you in another couple of weeks. Right. Just for now, remember, when in doubt, ask your assistant manager. Ask your crew chief. Okay. And then because you're not going to remember it all. Right. So what happens, dude, in that analogy, it moves slowly. Yeah. I think it moves slowly. Yeah. So I think, the language we see with these laws and these rituals, etc. I know you're going to ask a little bit about what the laws, what they're tapping into, what they're addressing. So I don't want to give too much of that away. But I definitely feel the laws are intended to build a culture and a way of life. Mm-hmm. So that Israel, in essence, learns its identity. Yeah. And the big thing I think we mentioned last week is when I think of Leviticus in particular, even if I don't understand the nuance of a law, I do understand it's been repeated enough. I am holy. I am setting you apart to be holy. He wants to make Israel different than the other nations. Yep. The other nations are going to have, they're polytheistic. Yep. Like the Canaanites, they've got a god or goddess for crops and fertility and protection and healing and sustenance. Endless gods and goddesses, and they got to learn the dance and the ritual. Not with me. Yeah. I am one. Yeah. In Deuteronomy, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Yeah. So they are going to have to learn what that means. Yeah. What does it mean to live under God? So what I get out of Leviticus is, okay, there's man's way. Yeah. There's my way. Yeah. In what arena, God? And he says, in all of them. Yeah. Right? From what you wear to how you speak. To when you work. When you work, where you work, to how you relate to your neighbors, your property, your crops. Yep. The stranger who crosses your borders. Yes. Your crimes when you blow it, because you are sinful. We've learned that, as we saw last week. And the penalties, you're going to get this, and it's a lot. Yeah. And they're going to your orientation analogy, which I love, experience it kind of on the job as they go. Well, and one of the things that's interesting is not only is God working with them in their infancy to train them new things, really he has to undo things too, right? Yeah. Because they became really the people group, the nation in captivity, in slavery. Yeah. Right? So all these people have known, they've passed on the stories of, their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They know about Joseph, but they haven't experienced No, they haven't lived it. That's a great point, dude. They've been slaves. Right. And they've been slaves under Egypt, who, again, polytheistic, right? They're worshiping many gods. I mean, in many ways, this is God's first battle of establishing who he is versus who Egypt is, right? Showing his people, I'm the one true God. Yep. Every plague that I send is going to be a direct response to one of these gods that Egypt worships, and I want to show you, my people, that I'm number one. Absolutely, dude. And when I get that, if I'm a newer believer, I'm newer to the Old Testament, and I hear you say that helps me. I've heard people say that, like, oh, okay, like I can get that. I might not understand every nuance. I got to know who God is, and that he's different than the gods of Egypt, or the gods of Canaan, or the gods of wherever. And these laws are kind of
Right.
You want nook and cranny illustrations? Right. Here you go.
Let's dive into some of those, right? The laws, because there are so many. Let's kind of take one that I think I find fascinating, because I think people's argument for this law of why they still practice it today is ridiculous. Let's take some of the dietary laws.
Sure.
One of the things that many churches will kind of talk about is, well, if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for us.
Oh, yeah.
And there must have been some health benefit to it. And
Dude, are you about to sell me Ezekiel bread? Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going. Keep going. Don't you sell me that.
To me, it's the most ludicrous argument. I'm sorry, you have all of the nations of the world and they don't know how to cook pork or fish or any of these things. You're telling me that it was only after Christ came that the idea of how to cook these things became a thing.
And I've heard that too from some groups.
And so to me, I'm more interested in the fact that God said this and specified this for a reason. Why?
Yeah.
Because when Christ comes, he does away with that particular law.
Right.
Right. And so I want to start with that one, because I think that one is fascinating for that reason, because he says, no, I don't want you to do this. And then after a period of time, he says, well, no, now it's okay.
Right.
And I think this is going to go to what you're talking about in the infancy and training.
Absolutely.
And so touch on.
Yeah. I think Israel ultimately, dude, let's face it. I make jokes all the time whenever. I think you may have been with me in a few places, dude. If I'm eating some steamed crabs or some delicious steamed shrimp, I'm like, thank you for my new covenant, New Testament freedom. Hallelujah. And, you're right. I don't believe, when Christ came, the intrinsic evil of crabs or shrimp or, whatever.
Lobster.
That it just changed magically. The fact that Jesus does away with it, Mark chapter 7, it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of the man. For out of the heart come all manner of evil, right? Covetousness, lust, adultery, greed, and on. The list goes. And he says that is what defiles the man. Now, we should already know that from Genesis 3.
Right.
The crash. We have fallen into sin. Our nature has fallen. We who once were completely innocent, our parents, our first parents, who had access to God, threw that away, rejected, and the human race has been limping ever since. So that's the issue. The evil is never in the food.
Yep.
So why does God specify certain foods? Now, my belief on this, and there are some scholars that debate, I think it's pretty easy. I don't want to gross us out, but let's use a Maryland analogy.
Yeah.
I love steamed crabs. I know what crabs eat.
Right.
It's pretty gross.
Yeah.
It's pretty nasty. So a lot of people say that was kind of an easier to understand, because you're going to call certain foods unclean. I simply believe, not because they were intrinsically unclean, to your very point, Nathan, Jesus says they're all done. If there's something intrinsically harmful, I don't think Jesus is going to want us to do it.
Right.
So I think it is a covenantal identification, not a natural one.
Yeah.
Nothing intrinsic to the creature or the animal.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to, that's my belief, to point out certain animals unclean. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I kind of see it. Kind of gross. Gross. These are clean. Well, they're all animals.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be blunt. They all eat. They all excrete.
Right.
They eat and poop. And it's like, okay, if you get right down to it, why is one clean, the other isn't clean? So I think this is covenantal language.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's important, and Israel needed to obey those laws because God gave them.
Yeah.
And I've said this before, dude. If for some reason God said, every Tuesday from 4 to 6 p.m., you must wear purple.
Right.
All right.
Yep.
I don't really need to ask.
Yeah.
My God, who is setting us apart in our infancy. The child doesn't understand. I want to pull open these interesting doors.
Right.
And what's this plastic thing? They don't even know what plastic is. Blocking me. There's fun things under there. Yeah, there's bleach.
Right.
There's all kinds of chemicals.
Hand sanitizer.
All kinds of stuff that could be harmful to children. So we don't know the why.
Yeah.
But the child is learning my parents are providing and protecting.
Yeah.
And I think with every law that you throw out, at some level, they are to develop that sense of trust.
Yeah.
Provide and protect. What happens when we become adults? The child locks come off.
Yeah.
Because there is no danger to the person that's properly understanding it, right? But hopefully a 30-year-old man is not going to say, hey, I'm thirsty. Let me drink some of this Clorox.
Yeah.
Of course not. You know what it is and you leave it alone, and it can sit there for years.
Yeah.
And you're not going to touch it. But when you got a child, you're going to put laws in place, provision and protection. So that's my thought on the dietary codes.
As you're talking, I think this would be a good point. I'm gonna throw a curveball on you, Greg.
Please.
I think it would be good if we set up basically the three overarching laws that Israel encountered.
Of course.
And I think it would be helpful if we could kind of do that and then throw some categories in there so people understand what we're talking about.
I'm glad you asked, dude. You're talking about the threefold division: moral, civil, and ceremonial. Yeah. That's a great. That probably would have been more helpful. We're really talking about largely this dietary thing, a ceremonial law, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is ceremonial, which tends to be symbolic. It tends to kind of almost liturgically act out a truth. Yeah. And I think what's liturgically acted out in those Old Testament laws, God is holy, you are not. Yep. There's his way and there's your way. I'm doing my hands like we're still on radio. Right. This, that. Just imagine my cat-like reflex. Never mind. Nathan's seeing it and he's unimpressed. And you would be too. But the moral law is a reflection of God's eternal heart. It ain't going to change, in other words, right? How does God feel about adultery? Well, in the Old Testament he was tough, but he loosened up. He understands modern. Of course not. God is always going to hate adultery. Right. Period. Full stop. Case closed. Right. That's it. God is always going to hate theft. Yeah. He's going to hate his name being used improperly. He's going. So those laws are what we would consider moral foundational laws because they reflect God's eternal heart and unchanging perspective. And we largely find those in the Ten Commandments. I think so. That's, if you're looking, where do I find the moral laws? Like, 10 Commandments. When Jesus comes in and he summarizes all the commands in 2. Yep. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's a 10 Commandment cliff notes. Yeah. Or what do they call them now? Spark notes?
Spark notes, yeah.
Absolutely, dude. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that. The first 4 are vertical. The next 6 are horizontal. So the first 4 about how we relate to him. We should worship the Lord, have no other gods besides him, etc. Now, I will throw it out. Maybe we can come back to it. The one debated one, and this is a hot topic among very serious believers that look at these things, and rightly so, would be the Sabbath. Yep. What do we do with the Lord's Day? Yeah. Because, and that's a common argument, the Sabbath doesn't change because it's a moral law. Yeah. Again, let me give you my quick thing on that. We can come back to it. So Seventh-day Adventists are probably the most, what's the word, literalistic about it? Yep. Which is, I think, a little more mechanical than, say, literal. Yep. Literal just, to me, means true to the text. So I think the literalistic is kind of rigidly mechanical. Yep. It was on Saturday. We know that. That's the Jewish Sabbath, so it doesn't change. Yep. The problem we see, as we've talked about before, is when you read the New Testament, particularly the book of Acts, or 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says on the first day of the week, the collection should be set aside. It sure seems like Sunday is the day that they gather and meet. So that's let's just put that in its own category of debate. There are some sincere believers that believe the Sabbath is a moral law. I do not. In that way. Sure. The moral heart of that law, yes, eternal, unchanging. Yep. Rest. Yep. I think, as you know, dude, where I'm going to go. Yeah. Hebrews chapter 4. Yeah. I do take it in the truest sense of the word. That was a temporary custodial thing. Yeah. Our true Sabbath rest is Jesus. Yeah. So to me, I'm able to make sense of that in a very satisfying way.
Right.
I don't believe Scripture's been compromised. I debate a friend on that if they wanted to. But let's just stick with the main topic, the moral law, unchanging.
Well, and what's interesting is when you talk to any hardcore Sabbatarian, and you look at any confession, what is arguably the most debated point in any confession anywhere, it's the Sabbath.
It's the Sabbath, always, dude.
Yeah.
Always the debated point. And I think, haven't we done a podcast or two on the Sabbath?
Yeah, we. I think last year, September.
I think
we did.
Yeah, because we talked about
Sabbath
rest.
and rest. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought so. I know you and I have talked about this, and I think even in a much earlier iteration, we may have had a guest on once, but
I think so. Yeah,
we'll have to go back and look. But the second category, dude, I did want to mention because we talked about moral and ceremonial. Mm-hmm. Ceremonial and moral are probably the easiest to kind of sort out.
Yeah.
Ceremonial, if it's about fabrics, if it's about pus sores, if it's about something, then you have this interesting category of civil.
Yeah.
Civil, I think, is what governs operationally.
Yeah.
This is outside of their worship practices per se, but boundary, property, money, disputes, things of that nature, things that a civil society, we have civil laws all the time, right? I don't know, did you guys have a homeowners association where you are? You may or may not.
We don't, no.
Which is a blessing.
Yeah.
We have a homeowners association. So in a sense, we've got some civil law within that.
Right.
And every so often they send out, make sure that the shutters are this color and blah, 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 blah. You're like, okay. It's a way to kind of keep everybody in a certain arena in check.
Right.
That's generally what those laws are governing. So again, sometimes this issue becomes murky, like is the death penalty a moral issue or a civil issue? My short answer on that, on a ridiculously complex subject, is I think it tends to be a bit hybrid. Mm-hmm. I think that the issue is the sin that occasions death at Israel at that time is the real issue.
Yeah.
We know God's moral heart on it.
Yeah.
This person was, God forbid, raped or killed, and there is a punishment which is doled out. So sometimes the punishment is the civil portion, and it's not like
the crime is the moral.
And the crime is the moral. It's not like they're sitting down, okay, here's verse 1 is going to be civil, verse 2. There is some pondering of these things and sorting them out, and I can see Christians making maybe slightly different applications at times. Because in the Christian tradition, dude, we have folks like, Roman Catholics historically have been opposed to the death penalty. Other communities like the Mennonite community, Christian communities, opposed to the death penalty. Then you have other traditions where they're not. And those things get debated, etc.
Well, and I think ultimately, right, this is why Christ breaks all the laws. And he's not just breaking the moral law down. He's saying, you want to know what the two greatest commands are, right? What the two greatest laws are. Love God, love your neighbor, right? You follow the first one, and that's going to lead you to pursuing righteousness, to pursuing what's good, and then it's going to lead you to interacting with everyone around you in a way where you love them over yourself. Right.
Dude, well said, which is part of what? Looking different than the world. And by the way, dude, in case any of our listeners caught it, I just wanted to stress what Nathan said. I heard it well. At first you said, this is when Jesus broke all the laws. And I thought, I bet people would say, and then you said he broke them down to the two greatest commandments. I said, I knew what you were saying. But just in case somebody, they were freeze frame, their mouth is ajar, it's hit the floor.
Right. Yeah.
The flies are going in it.
Particularly in light of what we said back at Easter.
Yeah, exactly. The sinlessness of Jesus. Nathan was not saying, hey, Jesus is sinful, no big deal. I knew you weren't.
Yeah.
I just thought, when I did that in a sermon, dude, what was it, years ago? I said, Lisa always says, there was a second when the one, dude, why am I saying this? This isn't even it. The one that comes to mind is I had a whole family laughing one time because I was talking about, and ironically, it was an Old Testament concept. Will God's people do something out of delight and desire, or will they do it out of raw duty? And I kept saying raw duty, raw duty, raw duty. I said, now I hear it. And I kind of noticed the family, like, why are they laughing? What, my zipper down? What? I got kind of booger that's showing up on the screen? What is this? So, I just went off the rails to get us back. But I will say this, dude. I do think it's an important distinction that historical theologians have helpfully called attention to.
Yeah.
When we talk about the laws in the books, I do think even if we have a working category, that helps me.
Yeah.
Oh, I might not know which one falls in what, but there's moral. Oh, there's civil. Oh, there's ceremonial.
Yeah.
We definitely, by the time we get to the New Testament, see the ceremonial. I think we can safely say Jesus is saying, okay, guys, these were the child safety locks.
Yes.
They're coming off.
Yep.
And you were right to obey them. Like, believe me, it would have been wrong to disobey them in that period.
Well, think about in the context, you and I are both huge movie people, right? Mm-hmm. And you have, like a good follower of Jesus, you have brought your children up to be good movie people.
Amen.
And you told them at a young age, this movie's not appropriate for you right now.
Oh, sure.
Right? You're growing, you're developing, you're learning, right?
Yeah.
The child safety locks, to your point, those were on at that point in time.
Great. Yeah.
And now that they're older, those have come off.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, now the way you've grown and developed shows me your maturity and shows me that you understand the lessons that I was trying to teach you, right? Lessons of discernment, lessons of self-control.
Yep.
And so now we can watch these movies, and I know that you will think through them critically. You'll discern the message that's being said in them, whereas a child, you wouldn't have.
Absolutely, dude. And there were times it was hard because, as I've said, our kids were so spread out. Isaac, my third one, there are times, and I've seen this. In a perfect world, I would have waited another year or two.
Sure.
His older brother's watching, and he's 11, 12. And then when I thought, that might have been better when he was 13, 14, just a little more mature, a little more, and, so but that's what you're aiming for. We don't do it perfectly, but you're aiming to lift those ceremonial laws, as it were, at the right time. And I think in light of the finished work of what Jesus was accomplishing and what he was calling attention to, those things were very freeing. So again, just establishing those distinctions, I think, will help us kind of moving forward in this conversation. So now the question becomes, people will often ask, okay, you've made this distinction. Are there any ceremonial laws or are there any civil laws that still apply to us today? Ceremonial or civil, not by necessity, no. Ceremonial, I'll go to the mat and say no.
Yeah.
If anything, the message I see in the New Testament is be careful.
Yeah.
Galatians, let's elevate the ceremonial law to make it a precondition of accepting Jesus. Circumcision.
Yeah.
Classic, symbolic, ceremonial law. It would have been a sin in that period to disobey this commandment. I want to be very clear on that.
Yeah.
By the time we get to Jesus, as we've talked about many times, remember the conflict with Timothy and Titus, right? And I always think I get it wrong. I think Timothy had circumcised, and Titus, he didn't.
Correct, because Timothy was going to work with Ephesus, who was a predominantly Jewish church. And
exactly.
Right?
I'm just
Poor
laughing,
Timothy.
Timothy, man.
Dude, I am just in that with my Bible class right now.
Yeah. Oh. Dude, well, it's just funny because the coin flip, you're like, sorry, Timmy. You Titus, hey, Tim, hang in there. I'm sorry, dude.
The worst part, he doesn't even get ice cream back then, right?
I know, man.
No binging Netflix for 2 weeks.
No Netflix, no Butterfinger Blizzard and Dairy Queen. Man, but to take that New Testament example, you see the freedom of Paul as he understood the ceremonial laws to have a missionary accommodation. He'll do anything. Yeah. Again, it's kind of like if you're telling me that if I shave my head, for me it wouldn't be much, but for you it would be a lot. If I shave my head, if I wear plaid from head to toe, that's going to give me a greater in with these people. I want to reach for the gospel. I'll do it. Yeah. I'm not going to say, well, I'm free not to wear those clothes. Paul goes, I'll wear whatever. Right. So that's the kind of, he knows taking Timothy in to a Jewish evangelism campaign. Yeah. That him not being a circumcised would be a distraction. Yeah. Timothy, and here's the thing, all jokes aside, Timothy said, yeah, absolutely. He gets it and does it and he goes in. Titus would have been a different case. He won't budge with Titus.
Right.
Because who wanted him to get circumcised were the false teachers.
Yes.
The Judaizers that believed that you had to have faith in Christ, but you also had to be circumcised. And Paul said, I ain't playing that game.
Right.
That's a false gospel. So in that case, he says, don't you dare, Titus. We're not doing this.
Yep.
So very different purposes. But what it shows you is a ceremonial law.
Yeah.
You see the freedom.
Yep.
So that's why I would say out of necessity, no.
Yeah.
The only time I could see applying it, to me, I wouldn't even view it as a law as much as I would view it as an evangelistic aid or concession.
Yeah.
Right? Like if there was a culture, okay, here's one. For the most part, Islamic, Jewish dietary laws overlap.
Yeah.
So, not eating pork, for instance. Okay, I'm right there. Maybe I was a Jewish person, came to faith in Christ. I knew I was free. Hey, I won't eat pork because if that helps me get an in with this person I love to share Jesus with and introduce their family to, tell them about how amazing Christ is, I'm going to do it. But that, to me, it's not like you're returning to a law.
Right.
It's a missionary accommodation.
Yeah.
So, dude, are we playing an old
we're
cast?
Good. No, we're
That's
good.
So funny. I thought I heard, hey, we're these guys.
You did, but we're good.
I love it. So, that being the case, you asked about civil laws. No, I don't think we're bound by any civil laws either. Mm-hmm. I think the civil laws were laws in place for Israel during that time.
Would it be fair to say that we are bound by civil laws of wherever we currently live?
Oh, absolutely. If you're asking that, 100%. Yeah. Then I think, so our culture, let's just say we've got civil laws.
Yeah.
Speeding.
Right.
I'm driving here to church because I got to meet you for a podcast, and we're going to meet in a room, and I'm like, gosh, Nathan always gets here before I do. He's 30 minutes away. I'm 2 minutes away. I cannot let Nathan wait 10 minutes. I'm going to speed like a demon, go down a 30-mile-an-hour street at 60. I get pulled over. I don't think you know, officer, I've got freedom in Jesus.
Right.
I got freedom in Christ. I think it's, that's good. Yeah.
I got freedom to write you a ticket.
I got freedom to write you a ticket, and you ain't got any freedom to avoid it.
Right.
And that officer is right. I don't. So I see what you're asking. No, 100%. I think we are, because of God's moral law, he tells us to submit to the governing authorities in our culture. Yeah. So if you live in a culture, and guess what? I'm going to say something that's a little, I know a lot of people, it's fine to drink. I'm 18, but I'm responsible. I think you can't really make a strong case for that. You're supposed to be 21.
Yeah.
So you should drink when you're 21.
Yeah.
If they change it to 22, I think you drink when you're 22.
Yeah.
Because you're not sacrificing your faith.
Yeah.
You're not diluting your allegiance to God.
Yep.
So, if you're in Canada and they have one law pertaining the male, and you're in the U.S. and we have a different law, I think glad you asked it, because the moral law behind it is God telling us to be good citizens, model citizens that do not cause distraction. And part of it, dude, when we think of the gospel, I mean, bad citizens, it's a distraction from the gospel.
Yeah.
It's almost like, as Paul said, shut up,
right.
Take your medicine so you can share the gospel with people.
Yeah.
And, pay your taxes.
Yeah.
Right? Pay your taxes. I mean, that's a classic example. Jesus, you give to Caesar what's his.
Yep.
And unless you're making a case like in the book of Daniel, where a king issues a decree that you're never to pray to anybody but me.
Right.
Nope.
Yep.
That's a civil law.
Yeah.
That's in violation of God's moral law.
What's interesting is Daniel even respected the government enough to take a ceremonial law and not make a demand, but make a request.
Yes.
Right. He's in the land of Babylon.
Yep.
And he doesn't demand that the ceremonial laws of his people be upheld and upkept.
Yep.
Right. He politely makes a challenge to the guard.
Yeah.
Right. Let's do a little test and see if you find out that we're not performing as well as the ones who you're giving all of these things to.
Yeah.
Right. Then we'll stop.
Right.
We'll submit to your authority and we'll do what you ask us to do. But would you grant us our request of trying this out?
Absolutely.
Right.
Which he had every reasonable right and hope to do.
Yeah.
Because there's deference.
Yep.
There's respect. Yeah, I see what you're saying, dude, about civil. The reason I say it is there are some groups that used to be called, I think there's Reconstructionists, Theonomists. It's a very small pocket of professing Christians, so I don't spend too much time on it. I almost don't like calling attention to it, that believe the mission of the church is essentially to reinstitute all of Israel's laws.
Yeah.
So in some cases, you get to stoning sexual sinners. You get to, in a sense, you're kind of returning to this time that I don't see any evidence in the New Testament. In fact, I see the exact opposite, contrary. So Reconstructionists are some that would say, moral, civil, ceremonial. There's debate. A lot of them say, well, ceremonial, we don't sacrifice anymore because Jesus is the sacrifice, but we should do this and we should do that, and homosexuals should be put to death. And you hear some of these things.
Right.
In very splinter groups.
Yeah.
Most Christians that I meet in a variety of traditions, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
And it certainly doesn't match the marching orders Jesus gave for his church.
Yeah.
Which is not to rebuild a society like Israel.
Right.
It's to invite men and women into the kingdom of God and let that experience be here on earth through the hearts that submit to Christ.
Dude, this is annoying because we're running low on time.
I know, dude.
So
hit me up with something else.
I'm going to hit you with one more,
okay.
And then I'm going to do what we did last week. I'm going to save one
I love that.
for next week.
All right.
So the last one that I'm going to hit you with is so you've said before that the Old Testament was written for us, but not originally to us.
Yes.
Let's unpack that perspective to help us read through those tougher sections that we might encounter.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, dude, because it's the old phrase that I do think helps when we're reading the Bible. This would go for both. Mm-hmm. There is one yes, it is written ultimately for our benefit. I want to be clear on that. But in terms of its original recipients, original audience, we are reading somebody else's mail.
Yeah.
And we should take that into effect. Sometimes it can get overplayed. I understand the sentiment behind it. The Bible is God's personal love letter to me. Mm-hmm. That's tough sledding when I'm reading Genesis 5 and the genealogy from Adam to Noah.
Yeah.
Dude, that's tough sledding.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm answering it. You didn't want me to.
No, I do.
Oh,
this is the one I want you to answer.
This is the one you want me to answer.
Yes.
Okay. All of a sudden I thought, wait, have I...
This is the one you're going to answer, and then I'm going to get to the one.
And then you're going to get to one. So I would just say what I think we should do is ask the question, what does it mean, before we ask, what does it mean to me?
Yeah.
Because these texts were written to ancient Israel. Yep. Let's be honest, dude, under a different covenant and culture.
Yeah.
But preserved for our edification now.
Yeah.
Today. 1 Corinthians 10 makes that case.
Mm-hmm.
So while we don't apply every law directly, as I think you've well helped us establish, I still think we can ask, what does this reveal about God? Mm. Does this tell me something about God's heart?
Yeah.
Does this tell me something about what he's doing? I think in a lot of preaching, dude, I'm thinking of a couple people in particular. Mm-hmm. One that you and I are maybe not the biggest fans of. I'll just leave it there. We've talked about this a lot. I think often there's just this forced thing like this text, and I'll tell you what is my most unfavorite application. When you hear a creative, fanciful sermon, and it's funny, and it's, oh my goodness, this obscure Old Testament story, and the preacher, he's describing my life. He shouldn't be.
Right.
You ain't got nothing to do with that person that lived 1,500 years ago in a different time, different place.
Right.
So that tells me that the creative, fancy imaginations of the preacher may be doing a lot more work that they shouldn't be doing, and it's robbing us of the text. So I think my two questions are always, what would this have meant to the people that are receiving this, that are being addressed, being described?
Yep.
Let me just not put myself in there.
Yep.
Let me slow down. Again, remember I said we bring a therapeutic.
Yeah.
Got to be about me. I got to look for my little takeaway. I got to look for my little inspirational thought. No. I'm going to see what it means to them.
Yep.
It's the old say, we've heard a preacher say that, when everybody goes around in the small group, well, to me, this verse means, really, to me, it means this. What does it mean to you? And the person say, hey, could I ask somebody, what does this verse mean if none of us had ever been born?
Right.
What does it mean? What's its objective meaning?
Yeah.
Then we find that out. Hopefully we discover it or discover some of it. And then I think the application process is more to keep in mind with our story, our 6 C's through the Old Testament, right? Community, creation, crash, covenant, crown, crisis. Where are we in that story? That's probably helpful. What is God doing in that story?
Yeah.
What does it say about God, and what does it say about maybe human nature?
Yeah.
Now I'm at a point, I think I've done the work that I can start maybe getting some help and insight.
Well, and I think that's true in general for the Bible. Right?
I agree.
It doesn't matter whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament.
I agree. We're reading somebody else's mail.
Yeah. And literally in the New Testament, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Most of the letters, those were written.
I didn't live in Corinth in 67 A.D.
Right.
Did you? I don't think so. Boy, you're old, dude.
Right.
No, I mean, so I'm their situation, their context. So we should, by the grace of God, I think good teachers should do the work.
Yeah.
Good students should be doing the work. Good writers and readers and small group leaders. We're doing everything we can to close that gap.
Yeah.
To understand what it meant originally, because that's good exegesis, the good excavating what's in Scripture, and then once we get that, let's start thinking what touch points to our lives we can make.
Nice.
That was a good question, dude. And what's your tease?
All right, so my tease for next week, I don't think it's going to be quite as good as the one we had this week, but I think it's still worth exploring, right? And it's actually kind of a two-parter. So the first kind of piece of this is example of genealogy or name that most people skip over, but it actually has something powerful going on underneath the surface.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So you're going to answer for us. Okay, what is, as you're reading through those lists of genealogies, those lists of names in the Old Testament, right? We might be tempted to just kind of read it and move on. But what's one that's an example of one? No. You should actually slow down.
Oh,
here's why.
Good question.
And then part two is going to kind of go out more broad and just say, why shouldn't we skip over those names, those genealogies, because they just feel irrelevant or boring?
That's good.
So again, we're going to focus in on specifics, but the general question is, why shouldn't we just skip over all of those? And then you're going to narrow us down. Here's an example of why we shouldn't just skip over those.
Now, I will tell you, dude, next week,
yes,
we are going to have a special guest.
We are.
And I'm very excited about the topic. It's a little bit, well, it's not really niche. It's
focused.
It's very focused. That's a better way to put it. And I hope I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Because the guest we have on knows this topic, as I've told Nathan, better than anybody I've ever known.
Yep.
And I've every time I hear him expound upon this, I actually brought this guy in for a pastor I worked with years ago, his ordination, who was, I asked him, what would you most feel, what do you think is most lacking? He went to seminary, he did it, and he said, honestly, Greg, my Old Testament knowledge, which I apprecited the humility of that.
Yeah.
I said, I get it. I mean, just because you graduate seminary, get a degree, doesn't mean, I've got the Old Testament.
Right.
You can kind of have I'll do what I need to do for my surveys and my few classes, but I'm going to stick with the new. You can have a kind of a distant connection to the Old Testament. So I brought in this guy, and I got as much out of it as the other pastor did. I brought in, who's going to be our guest next week, and dude, I think we spent 6-7 hours that day. I remember we had breakfast, we had lunch, and just let him walk through key elements of the Old Testament. Dude, the amount that I learned in that was phenomenal. So it's going to be a neat topic next week. Yep. Old Testament, of course, but very focused, as you said.
Yep.
Maybe we can invite that guest in to weigh in. I mean, I'll still share my thoughts.
Yeah,
maybe.
No, I think that'll be good because
thoughts,
I'm not planning on sharing anything about that. So
Yeah.
I'm going to let you take the bullet on that one.
Yeah. Note to self: download an answer from a smart person. Got it. Good. Got it ready. Thanks, ChatGPT. Hope you don't let me down and hallucinate an answer of a scholar that never existed. All right. Good.
Oh, man. Dude, this has been good.
So much fun.
So glad we were able to do this.
Me too.
Until the next time, we just rock the Casbah. Thank you again for listening to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Once again, please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you ever find yourself in the Forest Hill, Maryland area, please feel free to stop by at 135 Industry Lane, and you can get all of our service times and information at christfc.org.
These go to 11.